In the days leading up to the release of Fire Emblem 17, aka Fire Emblem Engage, the reviews started rolling in and something weird was happening with them. Reviews from different online gaming websites would appear to be describing a very different Fire Emblem from each other. Some of them said that this game doubled down on the dating simulator aspects that got popularized in Fire Emblem Three Houses, although were there to a lesser extent ever since Awakening, or FE12 if you know how to apply translation patches. However, other sites said that this felt like a return to the Fire Emblem of old, with much more focus on the grid-based strategy that we all love about the game series, rather than the slice-of-life, day-to-day getting to know your anime boyfriend and girlfriend. At first, this seems to be a pretty big contradiction. Fire Emblem Engage can't both double down on and get rid of the dating aspects of Three Houses, can it? Well, I mean, if you've seen the title of the video, you know that I believe it absolutely can and absolutely did simultaneously double down on and get rid of the social aspects of Fire Emblem Three Houses. Honestly, this may be partially due to recency bias, but Engage is actually shaping up to be one of my favorite Fire Emblems. Now, obviously, what I'm looking for in a Fire Emblem isn't necessarily what everyone else is looking for in a Fire Emblem, so I'll give a quick breakdown of my tastes in terms of what I do and don't like about Fire Emblem. I really like FE6 and FE Fates because they feel like they have very diverse casts. FE6 has one of the largest casts in the series, and everyone fills kind of a different role, even the ones in the same classes as each other. FE6 Hard and Conquest Hard also tend to be the difficulties I enjoy the most. While it can be rewarding to play in the higher difficulties such as Conquest Lunatic or FE12 Hard 3, I find that can be a strain to play for a long period of time, causing me to take frequent breaks. It took me over a year to beat Path of Radiance Maniac mode, as an example. Although in retrospect, a lot of that time was spent watching the enemy phase, so maybe that's a Path of Radiance problem. My favorite game kind of alternates between Radiant Dawn and Thracia, but Three Houses is pretty solidly my least favorite, for a variety of reasons. Mostly, I hate the hard mode difficulty being too easy and feel like Maddening is way too much of a step up from hard, and the Monastery feels way too mandatory and way too time-consuming. I also feel like outside of Maddening mode, the cast struggles to differentiate each other from one another. Yes, there are some who are better at authority or magic or bows or whatever, but ultimately, if you're not hyper-focused on min-maxing in Maddening mode, most characters can fill almost any role, albeit some a little bit worse than others. My biggest fear for Fire Emblem Engage, therefore, was that they would double down on the Monastery, and I would spend more than half of my gameplay time running around an area, going fishing, cooking meals, going fishing, walking the dog, going fishing, checking out the hot spring, going fishing, tutoring my students, going fishing, going fishing, going fishing, going fishing, blowing my fucking brains out because I'm going fishing. Thankfully, that's not what ended up happening. The Solmanel feels like kind of a cross between the Monastery, which I hated, and the My Castle system from Fates, which I honestly didn't mind. It fills a similar role in the plot of just sort of being an extra dimension you can teleport to in order to spend time with your allies and do activities, but honestly, I feel like that's better than we have to go back to the monastery every month, especially during part 2, which just got really grating and sort of took away from the plot. Having the hub exist in kind of a pocket dimension on its face is more silly than walking back to the monastery every time you complete a battle, but realistically, the fact that it is more silly feels like it takes away from the story less. I don't know. The story is already very out there. I mean, the game opens with a literal anime theme song with sung lyrics like we're watching a Saturday morning cartoon. It really set the tone, and honestly, I don't like anime, but it got me hyped, it got me excited. I don't really know how to describe it. Maybe I'm becoming a bit of a weeb the more that I focus on Fire Emblem content. But the Solmanel is improved on the Monastery from more than just a plot perspective. If it were just a plot improvement, I wouldn't really care. I've said it a million times, but I don't really like the story of Fire Emblem. I don't think it's a selling point. they haven't really done a good story outside of FE5 and FE9. And, like, that's okay. I'm here for the gameplay, so let's talk about how the Summonel affects gameplay. At a glance, I can see how the Summonel appears to superficially double down on the monastery portions of Fire Emblem. Fishing is back and slightly expanded, and alongside it are a bunch of other mini-games, everything from polishing rings, to a rhythm game, to button mashing for crunches in order to get stat boosts in the next battle. There's also a system where you make donations to the other nations so that you can adopt more animals, and the animals will give you more resources that you use in cooking, or as gifts. My favorite thing to do is to give Vander horse manure. He hates it, but he's the worst Jagan in the series, so I love rubbing horse manure in his face, cause fuck you, Vander. Fuck you very much. Take some horse manure. Yum yum, very tasty. Eat your horse manure, you stupid, stupid man. This is your punishment for being mean to Clan. But yeah, in many ways, the Summonel is just an expanded version of the monastery. And if you liked the monastery, which I personally absolutely hated, Engage will give you a better version of the monastery, in my opinion. There's a lot more to do, and you don't feel like you are funneled into fishing so you can get your professor rank up as fast as possible. I think that's a net plus. And I'm glad it's there for the type of fan who is really into this as the dating sim. While I personally think that this cast is less fun to hang out with than the Three Houses cast, that's a very subjective thing, and if you want to spend your time hanging out with Louis, who am I to judge? Louis's awesome. I will judge you if you marry Vander, however. However, it feels less mandatory, and I think that was my biggest problem with Three Houses, because it was fun to engage with the system during my first playthrough, but it really hampered me on repeat playthroughs, especially as that game really demands repeat playthroughs. It just ended up adding up so much time to the playthrough that it really discouraged me from going back and experimenting. Things you do in the Summonel can have an effect on gameplay, the biggest examples being you can exercise with Elir in order to get a stat boost, and you can go for a meal with up to 2 of your party members in order to build supports and get a stat boost. There are some other minor ways in which the Summonel affects gameplay, such as the randomized activity that all of your party members do, giving them a stat boost, or being able to build the bonds with the engaged characters by polishing rings, but overall, none of it feels mandatory unless you are really min-maxing things. This is a far step away from the activities you're doing in the monastery affecting not only your monthly budget of gold, but also really having an impact on how you can send specific people down specific class lines. Honestly, even on hard, which was turn your brain off difficulty, it almost felt mandatory to have at least 1 or 2 students that you went to meal times with just so you could tutor them in the academy and all that fun stuff. Here, the bonuses very much feel like the sort of thing that you got in Fates. You can forge stronger weapons, you can cook to get stat boosts, and you can do some other stuff to help build supports and bonds faster, but unless you are going for the ultimate min-max LTC, none of it is necessary. It's all very helpful, but none of it is necessary. And this is highlighted by the fact that you don't actually ever have to go back to the Summonel after your first visit. When you clear a chapter, it gives you the option either to teleport to the Summonel or to return to the Awakening-style world map. And if you wanted to, you could just never go there. It is helpful to go there because that is how you get forges, and also that's how you can inherit skills from the engage rings, which I'll go over in a little bit, but it's not mandatory, and I really like that. I really like that. In fact, I don't think I've spent that much time there throughout my playthrough. And the majority of the time that I have spent there has actually been decently enjoyable because I've been choosing to engage in these activities. I actually went fishing a second time for no benefit, just because I had fun with the revamped fishing minigame. It was a nice way to give my brain some time to relax in between the chapters because the chapters were actually kind of difficult. So, I do want to give a couple of disclaimers before talking about the gameplay and difficulty. I'm not an expert at Fire Emblem. I've never claimed to be. In fact, I make my brand on being bad at Fire Emblem but doing challenge runs anyway. I don't actually think I'm terrible at Fire Emblem. I do think I'm probably slightly above average. in terms of skill, but I also often play poorly and stupidly, so I don't know, maybe it balances out. That said, at time of recording, I just finished Chapter 14 in my first playthrough, which is on hard mode, and I have been finding the difficulty very challenging, but in a fun way. One of my biggest complaints about Three Houses was how there was no middle difficulty in between the turn your brain off easy hard mode, or the incredibly punishing, you have to know the detailed, deep mechanics of the game maddening. Engage's hard mode feels like a middle ground between those two. It may be because I haven't fully gotten used to all of the systems of Engage, but the difficulty is in a spot that I like it. It feels extremely player phase heavy, which I really like in my Fire Emblems. You get a lot of tools, but so do the enemy, and it's very hard to find units that are able to enemy phase effectively. The poster child for player phase skills are the Emblems. These give you a couple of passive effects, which you need to build up over time, and then the ability to engage, which basically activates your Super Saiyan mode, allowing you to make use of even more powerful passive and active abilities for 3 turns. Early examples of this include engaging giving you an extra 5 move, the ability to battalion-like shoot through a line of enemies, or the ability to rewarp yourself and then attack with an extremely powerful tome. As the game goes on, you get more, and they are more powerful and more complex, allowing for a single unit to have a really dramatic turn or series of turns if you utilize them properly. However, in order to compensate for this high power level on player phase, the game has very high quality enemies, and a lot of the enemies will have engage rings of their own, allowing them to do powerful player phase actions. Or rather, powerful enemy phase actions. I mean, it's their player phase, you know what I mean. Additionally, the bosses in this game often have 1 or more revival crystals. These function kind of similar to the extra health bars on monsters in Three Houses, or the revival crystals from Kaga Saga if you're a cool kid. Oftentimes, the chapters, even early on, have several bosses, multiple of whom have revival crystals, meaning there are several hard to get rid of, yet also high priority targets you need to handle. While the emblems are the flashiest and most powerful of the new mechanics, I would argue that the guard break system is the most impactful on a turn-by-turn basis. The weapon triangle is back, and in a big way. Now, if you take an attack on enemy phase at weapon triangle disadvantage, that character no longer gets an enemy phase. They just have to stand there and take hits without retaliating. On the flip side, however, if on player phase you attack a enemy at weapon triangle advantage, then you can break them, and now they can no longer attack. This is very useful for taking on some of the more difficult bosses, as you can team up with 3 or 4 units, and as long as you attack with the one with weapon triangle first, the other ones will not face counters. However, it also contributes to the game being much more player phase focused, as your units can less reliably tank a group of mixed enemies. If there are sword, axe, and lance units all together, you're not going to have someone who can enemy phase that entire group. Well, that's not entirely true. For once, Armor Knights are actually a very high value class, because they are one of the only reliable enemy phase classes in the game. This is because each class belongs to a subgroup that contains multiple classes. These subgroups grant a single attribute to all of the classes that fall under them, and these bonuses tend to be very impactful, actually. These subclasses are Dragon, Covert, Quemaster, Mystical, Cavalry, Flying, Armored, and Backup. Dragon is, as far as I can tell, unique to the avatar and gives you bonus attributes when you have an emblem equipped. Quemaster are fist and healing based classes, and they gain access to Chain Guard, which allows them to protect adjacent allies from a single hit if they are at full HP. Mystical remind me of the mages from Echoes because their magical attacks ignore terrain bonuses. On the flip side, covert units gain double terrain bonuses when inside terrain, meaning they can stack up to 60 avoid from a forest, which is absurd, and I love it. Cavalry units have extra move, something that was by default just a nature of the class, however now is considered on the same level of any of these bonus attributes. Flying units also have cavalry move and flyer movement, but they ignore terrain. This is again fairly similar to flyers that we've had in the past, but it's nice to see them acknowledge it as the huge upside that it is. The two most interesting to me, however, are armored and backup. Armored units cannot be broken, meaning that they can reliably counter on enemy phase as long as they have a weapon that reaches the opponent. This, combined with the fact that unpromoted armor knights have the same move as unpromoted infantry, I think finally makes armor knights a viable class. Generals have one less move than promoted infantry, but I still think the fact that they cannot be broken is a huge trade-off and a huge benefit that these units get. Backup, on the other hand, is kind of a bastardized version of Fates' pair-up attacks. How it works is if you are currently in range to be able to attack an enemy, and an ally attacks that enemy, you get to do a backup attack prior to the ally attacking. These attacks are at significantly reduced damage, even more so than in Fates, and they have a fixed 80% accuracy. Usually they're going to deal somewhere between 2 and 4 damage, although I have seen a couple that are as high as 5 or as low as 1. That said, properly positioning your backup units to allow them to get attack after attack after attack off on a high value enemy is really, really nice, and can once again be very useful for taking down the difficult to kill bosses. It's worth noting that these backup attacks only trigger on player phase, and that enemies have access to all of these skills. For example, you can't break enemy armor knights, and you will get backup attacked by fighters and myrmidons. Also, good luck killing thieves in forests, cause yikes. Speaking of thieves, knives are back, and they will automatically apply poison to any enemy they damage. They won't apply poison if they deal 0 damage, but they will apply poison as long as they deal 1 point of damage. Poison has been significantly reworked. Now, instead of dealing damage over time, it gives you a permanent debuff to your defenses. This can only be cured by Restore Staff or Antitoxin, and it is a huge deal. I actually used an Antitoxin for the first time in Fire Emblem history, and I don't feel bad about it. You can stack up to 3 layers of poison on a unit, and it will really cripple them. Due to the poison and also perpetual 1-2 range, knives are probably my favorite weapon to use. However, the class system has actually been reworked to how it was prior to 3 Houses, so now I can't just slap knives on everyone. I need to have specific knife classes, such as Wolf Knights and Thieves, if I want to use knives. I think this is a great change because it makes units feel more unique, and while you can theoretically reclass people into anything that you want, it's more difficult than in 3 Houses because you can't train weapon rank through going to tutoring sessions. Instead, they will gain weapon mastery if they spend enough time with a specific engage ring. For example, Leaf is able to give axe access to people so they can switch into axe-specific classes. Most classes only have access to 1 or 2 weapon types. However, there are variants of classes. For example, you can be either a lance armor, a sword armor, or an axe armor, which you may be familiar with if you've played Genealogy of the Holy War. Speaking of Genealogy, that's how the weapon ranks work. You can use weapons just depending on what your class is. Your class might have an S rank in axes and a B rank in lances. You can't build weapon experience, you're just stuck with those in that class. If you want to use different weapons, just change to a different class. I actually really like this system, and I'm glad to see it return. I do want to mention that the Time Crystal has returned, and it has 10 charges, which feels like a lot. In addition, there are some more casual-friendly features, such as the ability to grind infinitely on world map skirmishes, or the ability to save at any point in the map with no consequence. It's not like suspend, it's like an actual save, like in Radiant Dawn, or the ability to retain your experience after you get a game over and restart the chapter with people who have gained experience from the map. While some people will definitely complain that this is making Fire Emblem too easy, I don't have a problem with these because I can just ignore them. I only use a couple of charges of the Time Crystal, and it's usually as a result of me misclicking and deciding I should equip a different weapon, or I miss a 98 because Hybrid RN be like. Honestly, I don't think these features' inclusion hurts the difficulty, but I know that there will be at least one person who's mad about them. I say the more people who are able to play Fire Emblem, the better, and if these features help people who are less good at video games enjoy this wonderful game, then I'm all for it. Yay! There are a couple more features I want to talk about, but they both happen, I would say, about the beginning of the mid-game, so if you're trying to avoid spoilers, now would be a good time to click off the video. But don't forget to like and subscribe first. I said it in a funny voice so that you wouldn't know that I'm actually shilling and asking you to like and subscribe, because it does help the channel. But yeah, go ahead and click off if you are trying to avoid all spoilers. And if not, there are a couple of cool things I want to talk about in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So they do a couple of interesting things with the engage rings and the time crystal. After Chapter 10, you actually get them stolen from you, and for a good portion of Chapter 11, you don't have the ability to rewind time. You do get the time crystal back, but you lose the engage rings that you've been building the bonds with this whole time, and now have to get a whole new set. I think that's kind of cool, and reminded me of Thracia, how you get locked up in the prison and suddenly lose access to the units that you had. Also, taking away the ability to rewind time is very neat. I like that. I thought it was a cool subversion, and it really made me panic at first. I guess I've gotten used to the time rewind crutch. Lastly, this game does contain maps that are allusions to previous Fire Emblem games. They're actually, like, stated within canon to be areas in this world that are basically identical to areas within the other worlds, and you take trials there. These are all paralogs, and they are meant to help you get closer to the emblems. They allow you to unlock the A support with the emblems. But I do think it's kind of cool to get reimagined versions of, for example, Arena Ferox or Chapter 8 of Path of Radiance, because those are semi-iconic maps, and making them much more difficult by just pumping up the enemy quality is it's kind of cool. I will never, however, play Linz because it is the Sakai Gaiden in FE6, and I fucking hate that map. Anyway, yeah, my verdict is go buy Engage. It's very good. Again, this might be recency bias, but it's definitely cracked my top 5 in Fire Emblem games. And hopefully, when I finish it and take some time to get more concrete thoughts out, that won't change. Because, I'll be honest, my opinion on Three Houses definitely soured after some more time with it. And I'm hoping that the same thing doesn't happen with Engage. Because this game is, it feels like it has something for everyone.